All right, here's part 2 of the road to Civil War. So James Buchanan is elected president. He's America's first not married president, and he looks the part of a statesman. He's blessed with a fine physique, he's very handsome, and he's got elegant manners. But unfortunately, as it turns out, he has limited ability as a leader. He has a lot of bad luck. During the first 6 months in office, there are 3 major events that really cause his presidential undoing. 1, a sharp downturn in the economy. 2, the Supreme Court decision in the Dred Scott case. And 3, troubles in strife-torn Kansas. See, by the end of the summer of 1857, the economy was growing too fast. Too many railroads and factories are being built, and European demand for American corn and wheat was declining. The result was a financial panic triggered by the failure of the Ohio Life Insurance and Trust Company on August 24, 1857. If such a prestigious institution could close its doors, people worried that the entire economy might collapse. So this forces banks to begin calling in loans, businesses go bankrupt, tens of thousands lose their jobs, and banks start foreclosing on homes, farms, and businesses. Now, as he is confronted with a difficult and volatile situation, the nation needs a strong personality to lead it. Buchanan does not possess this trait. Now, there is a decision by the Supreme Court in 1857 which concerned the slave Dred Scott, and it only deepens the crisis. What it said, basically, what the Chief Justice ruled, was that as an African American, Scott is not a citizen and therefore has no rights under the Constitution. And it was unconstitutional to prohibit slavery in territory, so it therefore voids the Missouri Compromise of 1820. Congress could not exclude slavery from a territory, then neither could a territory government created by an act of Congress. So suddenly the West and the North is open to slavery. Now, the Dred Scott decision infuriates Republicans, all right? The Republicans, to them, the decision offers further proof of the reach of the South's slave power, which is the belief the slaveholders have a sway over Congress, and now they believe they have a sway over the Supreme Court. Now, there's turmoil in Kansas, combined with the furor over the Scott's decision, provided the background for the 1858 senatorial contest in Illinois. All right? There's controversy in Kansas. It fractures the Democratic Party. Stephen A. Douglas, one of the remaining Democrats with support in the North and the South, struggled to keep the party from fragmenting. What ends up happening is you have this. Okay, the rise of the Republican Party in 1854, it's Northern Democrats, anti-slavery Whigs, they formed the Republican Party. The Republican Party opposes slavery in the Western territories. I mentioned them a bit in the last video. Now, what you have is that in 1858, there's a senatorial contest in Illinois between the Democratic Senator Stephen Douglas and Republican hopeful Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln and Douglas engaged in 7 debates before huge crowds that met to hear the two men argue the central issue of slavery and its expansion. Now, what ends up happening is, though Douglas wins the senatorial race, Lincoln, his energetic campaign makes him a national figure. People begin to know who Abraham Lincoln actually is. Here's one of the quotes from the actual debates. Obviously, one of the more better-known Lincoln quotes, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." Very good quotes. Now, in October of 1859, the radical abolitionist John Brown and 18 armed men, both black and white, attacked the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. They hoped to capture the weapons there and distribute them among slaves to begin a massive uprising that would end slavery. Brown has no patience for nonviolent approach. Brown spent much of his life in the North, moving from Ohio to Pennsylvania and then upstate New York. To him, slavery appeared an unacceptable evil that must be purged from the land. And like his Puritan forebears, he believed in using the sword to defeat the ungodly. Now, what ends up happening is that October 16th, 1859, Brown left a Maryland farm and crossed the Potomac River with 20 men. They are bent on trying to capture an armory. Now, Federal troops commanded by Colonel Robert E. Lee soon capture Brown and his followers. A week later, Brown and his accomplices are put on trial for treason, murder, and conspiring for an insurrection, a slave insurrection. So the jury find him guilty, and Brown delivers a powerful speech in which he expressed pride in his efforts. On December 2nd, 1859, some 1,500 Virginia militiamen, including a young actor named John Wilkes Booth, who would later assassinate Abraham Lincoln, assembled for Brown's execution. Just before being placed atop his coffin in a wagon to take him to scaffold, Brown wrote a final message predicting that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away. Okay? They regard him in the North as a martyr for the cause. John Brown is convinced that the only way the crimes of this land will be purged away is basically in war, and he is correct on what is coming. So, President Buchanan has chosen not to go forth with the second term. So, we have 4 candidates who end up in the election of 1860. The candidates are Abraham Lincoln as a Republican, Stephen A. Douglas, a Northern Democrat, Breckinridge, a Southern Democrat, and John Bell, a Constitutional Union Party from the West. Now, the reason why there's a Northern and a Southern Democrat is the party had broken and fractured itself in half, which of course is not a good thing, because you know what this does? It splits the party ticket. Abraham Lincoln actually did not appear on any voting ballots in the South at all, but yet he still won the election. And many Southerners feared he would free their slaves, even though he did very much claim he was not there to take anyone's slaves from them. Lincoln had constantly responded that Southern fears were misguided. He refused to provide such assurances in public, but he misread the depth of Southern anger and concern over his election. So what ends up happening is that you have the beginnings of secession. In response to Lincoln's election, South Carolina secedes from the Union December 20th, 1860. The Union is dissolved. On February 18th, 1861, 6 other states follow. It's February the 1st, 1861. The 6 states that follow are Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. Now, on February 8th, a couple days later, the seceded states created a new nation called the Confederate States of America, and they elect Jefferson Davis as the president of their new nation. Jefferson Davis was from Mississippi. He was a West Point graduate who had served as a Democrat in the House of Representatives and the Senate. He had been Secretary of War under President Franklin Pierce. So he's cheered on by a jubilant crowd. He traveled from Mississippi to Montgomery, Alabama, the Confederate capital, for his installation. This is before they make Richmond, Virginia, their capital. Now, at the same time, you have the inauguration of President Lincoln. At Lincoln's speech, he spoke in depth about the need to stay unified and and he appealed to the Union. He stressed that we are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Lincoln's speech, though, it makes the South feel as though civil war is inevitable. On both sides, people assume that any war would be over quickly, and they are wrong. So the 7 deep states that seceded quickly form a new government. They fear the federal constitution that the United States had one nation was a contract. They agreed that they would do that, but they don't want to sacrifice the states now in the Confederacy to their autonomy. So that's why they're a confederacy and not a union. So they form the Confederate States of America, or the Confederacy. In the part 3 of this video of the Road to Civil War, we will discuss the attack on Fort Sumter and the beginning of the Civil War.